Ever since its inception in 1992, the Mario Kart series has continued to evolve its core mechanics and track design philosophy. Each installment has its own identity, introducing novel ideas such as having 2 races per car, pulling off stunts, gliding through the air, and most recently, the ability to defy gravity itself. Evidently, a lot has changed in the franchise's 30-year history, so let's take a deep dive into Mario Kart through the ages. How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to the loading zone, where today, once again, we have a very special guest who has flown here on set all the way from Canada. I would like to give a warm welcome to the one and only Schmidt Times.
Hello, thanks for having me, chum. How's it going, everybody?
Now, are you ready? Because today, we're going to be talking about some Mario Kart and the history and its evolution. Should be a fun time.
Oh, you betcha. Let's dive in.
So I suppose, what better place to dive in than where it all began, with the humble beginnings of the series back in Super Mario Kart on the SNES. Now, are you particularly familiar with this entry?
Yeah, I think it's the one I'm the least familiar with, and it's the newest one in the series that I ended up playing. But it's interesting to see that game after all the ones that came after it, because like there's things that you take for granted as the standard flow for Super or Mario Kart games, where it's like each cup has 4 courses to them. All your items come from item blocks. There's nothing special about the NPCs outside of yourself. And in Super Mario Kart, it kind of, I would say, changes the script, but it's the one that wrote the script. It's like it's got cups that have, I believe it was 5 courses per level.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. It was 4 cups of 5 for a total of 20 tracks.
Yeah, and like the thing I found most interesting about it when I first played it was how, I guess it would be like your rival in a race would have special moves that they use on you as you go. Like I know Bowser was like, he would launch fireballs at you.
Yeah, that's something I noticed as well when I was playing through for the first time. It's something that hasn't really been replicated since. I think Toad and Peach had some kind of a poison mushroom that shrinks you down. Yoshi had an egg. And like you said, yeah, there was the Bowser fireball.
Yeah.
So those CPU-specific items, while I'm not surprised they haven't been brought back, it was an interesting experiment, I suppose.
Yeah, because I would think that by today's standards, if the CPUs would break that out on you, people would be like, well, that's pretty cheap. I don't have a move like that.
Yeah, it does seem unfair with a modern lens.
Yeah. It's also interesting that they didn't have like an equivalent item out of the item boxes that would let you use maybe like a limited version of those. But it was like, no, they're just the CPUs get that and they can spam it.
And you get no such thing.
Yeah, which also now, just thinking about the item boxes, the way they were done in that game, also very different from other Mario Karts, because like they're just on the ground as a panel, and in some tracks, it's like there's only one line of them. Granted, tracks are pretty short in that game.
Yeah, like each lap takes about 10-15 seconds in Super Mario Kart, which is why, again, another thing that's different from the modern games is that you have 5-lap tracks instead of 3-lap tracks, purely because of how quickly you just blitz through them.
It's interesting too with like, that one had a lot of level theming that went right in line with Super Mario World, which I feel like newer entries, when you look at like Mario Kart 64, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but like, that's not really the case over there.
No, like you only really have Royal Raceway, which has Peach's Castle, but there isn't a whole lot of Mario 64 representation there.
Yeah, and I feel like that seems to trend throughout the future installments, but pulling back to Super Mario Kart again, that one, it's like even the fact that like, I'm glad they changed this convention, but like having the B button as your acceleration, I'm glad that didn't stick.
Yep, the first time I played it, I was like, why am I not moving? Am I doing something wrong here? Yeah, so B is the primary button was quite an interesting one.
Yeah, a quirky move for sure. But I know, and this is a similar deal with Super Circuit, but with Super Mario Kart, I know that's probably one of the very few games where I would use the brake quite a bit. Because like, at least I find with the controls, I feel like you move around, or I should say slip and slide around real easy in that game.
Yeah, I think both of the Mode 7 entries shared that quirk, where it does feel a little bit slippery, because when you've got a game that's only giving you the illusion of 3D, and you've got instead what's actually moving 2D sprites on a flat rotating 2D plane, the steering is never never quite gonna replicate the actual feeling of driving.
Right.
Yeah, and that makes going back to those two entries in particular a little bit of an adjustment. And like you said, the making turns, having to brake can prove to be problematic.
Yeah, definitely. But you know what I think has aged like a fine wine is Mario Kart 64. Well, actually, you know what? I say that, but it is still very much like a product of its time. It's like if you compare it to all the other ones that came after it, everything else controls more smoothly.
Yeah.
And you would kind of expect that. Because you wouldn't think they'd take steps backwards with each installment. Otherwise, there'd be a problem and it wouldn't be this long-running franchise that's as successful as it is.
It was arguably even the biggest step forward in the entire series from one game to another, because we're gaining a whole dimension here, gaining an axis.
True. I also think it introduced my favorite thing that Mario Kart's ever done, and that's bring Wario to the roster.
That's an interesting point, yeah, because I feel like Mario Kart 64, that roster formed sort of the template of the base roster that the future Mario Karts would use, because everyone in there is a mainstay. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Whereas in Super Mario Kart, you had Donkey Kong Jr., who's kind of disappeared, Koopa Troopa, who's been on and off, whereas here in Mario Kart 64, everyone there, I think, has consistently appeared ever since that game.
Yeah, and the thing that's kind of interesting is Super Mario Kart. I know there could be some wiggle room in the dates, but development with Super Mario Land 2, those games came out at the same year. So like Wario as a character existed while they were making Super Mario Kart, but he just didn't make the cut.
Am I making this up, or was he planned at one point?
Oh,
I think Kamek was definitely planned for Mario Kart 64 in place of Donkey Kong, but got cut last minute.
oh, that would have been a bold change.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm from that perspective, I'm kind of glad they didn't put Kamek in if they were going to get rid of Donkey Kong, because imagine they took him out. It's like, well, we would have had all these games to follow where he wasn't just an expected member of the roster.
Yeah, I feel like you could say the same about any character in Mario Kart 64. They just feel so locked in now. You can't have Mario Kart if you're missing one of them.
Yeah.
Although, saying that, I'm pretty sure Mario Kart Tour launched without Luigi, so...
Oh, frig, did it? Well, I guess it's like they kept that roster small so they could start building it out.
Yeah.
Because like at this point, you got all the Luigis. Any Luigi you could ever possibly imagine in the multiverse, he's there.
Yeah.
He's got a massive wardrobe now.
Back on the topic of Mario Kart 64, one thing that had definitely evolved quite a bit from SNES was the track theming. Like you said, in SNES, a lot of it was derived from Super Mario World, but the catch with that is that many of the tracks had reused themes, so there were like 4 donut planes or something.
Yes.
Whereas in Mario Kart 64, every track had its own unique biome, and they all felt very distinct for that reason.
Yeah, that's true. I also find the atmosphere in Mario Kart 64 feels... I guess they all kind of have their own charm to them, but like Mario Kart 64 feels particularly unique in that like it's got levels with like really catchy melodies to them, but then you also have other levels where it's like it's very much just an ambient kind of track.
Yeah, like Banshee Boardwalk would fall into the latter category.
Absolutely. And it's like any game to follow, it's like there's not really anything I would say is an ambient kind of track to those race courses. So everything's a lot more melody based, more dynamic, gets stuck in your head easier because you can't... I'd be surprised if someone can effectively hum Banshee Boardwalk and you'll be like, oh, I know that tune.
Yeah, even more so for DK's Jungle Parkway. I think that may be physically impossible to humanly replicate. But there are some cases, of course, where, like you said in Mario Kart 64, there are some ones that get stuck in your head. There are some more melody-based ones. Stuff like Koopa Troopa Beach, and of course, who could forget Rainbow Road?
Oh, yes.
With the leitmotif that's carried itself forward into many future entries to follow.
Yeah, that's... And you can even tell that Nintendo knew that when they made Deluxe and had that as like... They put that on the box art that stage.
Yeah, that was the final track of the base game, and it was a fitting one. It felt like a celebration of Mario Kart in a way.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that Rainbow Road, the original version, it had a cool atmosphere and the music was amazing, but it was just very, very long, and I think the same can be said for Wario Stadium in that game.
Absolutely, I agree with you there. Some of the tracks were too long for their own good.
Yeah. And I think at this point they were still trying to figure out how to pace the tracks, because of course with this being the first 3D entry, it does show its age in some places. Another place, for example, would be, I'd say the difficulty, because the rubber banding in that game is
Outrageous.
Brutal, yeah. As a kid, I struggled very hard in that game, and I didn't know why, but now, with the knowledge of what was actually going on behind all the smoke and mirrors, it makes a lot more sense.
And speaking of smoke, back in the day when you were first playing that game, did you figure out drifting?
No.
Yeah, same. Because like with that being the introduction of having mini turbos and everything, they did some things to make that evident when you're doing it, but like figuring that out when you're young, no chance. Compared to the other Mario Kart games, like it's real easy to notice and everything's pretty clear. That game, drifting's tougher.
Yeah, it doesn't quite feel the same, and the visual cue, of course, of like, I think they've just got a bunch of letter E's screaming out of the tires. It doesn't quite convey the message.
Yeah.
Now, after Mario Kart 64 came quite a revolutionary entry in the series, being the first ever handheld one, and that was Mario Kart Super Circuit.
Which I can say is very much an underrated gem, although I can appreciate how it can be most people's least favorite entry.
I was thinking exactly the same thing. It does get overlooked quite a bit these days, and yeah, it's not a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it does a lot for the series that people don't often appreciate.
Yeah, I also feel like even when you look at because like the closest parallel you can draw is with Super Mario Kart, with them both being 2D experiences.
Right.
But I feel like Mario Kart Super Circuit, it feels much smoother to control by comparison, which makes sense. You've got a good decade between the two.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
And I think the level theming they have in that game, they did bring back the 1, 2, 3, 4s for Bowser's Castle, but for a lot of them, they have unique stages for them.
Yeah, they got really creative there.
Yeah, and like a lot of those, looking back on them today, they feel like really distinct even from things that come today. It's like you never have a stage quite like Sky. Well, I guess you do have stages kind of like
Sky Garden.
Sky Island? Sky Gardens.
But then you got things like Sunset Wilds as well, and that had a day-night cycle, and for a Mario Kart track, that's unheard of. And the Wild West theme is such a cool idea for a track, and even beyond those, there's so many other unique ideas that haven't been seen again. Stuff like Yoshi Desert, they just casually gave Yoshi his own desert. There was Riverside Park, which we're going to be seeing added back into Mario Kart 8 very soon. Probably already by the time this podcast has been uploaded. Yeah, I think virtually every track, aside from the 4 Bowser's Castles, had its own unique biome. Even the 4 Bowser's Castles, each of them had their own unique background.
Yep.
So that's something that helped each track to feel very distinct.
Because I feel like if Super Mario Kart could have done that, would have had a much different impression of the stages in that game. Because, like, I don't think much of the fact that there's 4 Bowser's Castles in Super Circuit, because they're very distinct looking.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's worthwhile to explore each of those, and they don't feel like you're treading the same territory over and over again. And I guess Mario Kart Super Circuit is also the one that really solidified the cast of characters, because Mario Kart 64 sort of set the groundwork, and then Super Circuit being the next game is like, well, okay, well, this is the main cast going forward. We've got it going consecutively now.
Yep, it's locked in. They also added an option to pick a random character, which was kind of cool, and hasn't been seen in every entry since. I think it was in Double Dash, but since then it hasn't returned.
I never really thought much of that before. Yeah, I guess you take random for granted and then it's gone.
Yeah.
So I guess that was just more of a Game Boy Advance, GameCube era kind of thing.
Another thing Super Circuit brought to the table was that it had it had every single SNES track built into the game, so you essentially got double the content. So technically this was the first instance of retro tracks in Mario Kart, although they were just like straight ports with virtually no changes. Well, it must have been amazing at the time, because you buy a game and then you get 2 games worth of content.
Yeah, which I can say, I guess I technically got to experience Super Mario Kart quite a few years before actually playing the Super Mario Kart game for the Super Nintendo through Mario Kart Super Circuit. But at the same time, it took me years before I discovered that content was even in the game.
Yeah, the unlock requirements are weirdly specific.
It's like, it's not even just like, because I know at the time when I first got the game, I was really bad at it.
Oh yeah.
So like, there was no opportunity where I got 100 coins in every course to get me there. Or what was the requirement? You needed 100 coins in total
in the Grand
from
Prix.
the cup you played.
Yes.
Yeah, and it couldn't be the first time you played the cup.
No, it had to. Yeah, you had to do it twice, and that only then would you unlock the SNES Cup.
Yeah, but like discovering that was like, oh great, there's so much more to this game that I had no idea. And before then, I was perfectly content with the amount of content the game had.
Yeah, it's in itself, Super Circuit. Again, it's 20 tracks, which is more than what Mario Kart 64 had. So you have a lot to get through.
And then it comes crashing down again when Double Dash comes with the usual standard formula.
Yeah, back to 4 cups of 4, down to 16, no retro tracks. But Double Dash, honestly, might be a contender for my favorite Mario Kart game.
See, that's one of the ones where when you look back at the entire series, where it's like, it makes sense for people to have that one as their favorite because it was still is so distinct from the other Mario Kart games. Where like none of them offers the same thing that one does, or like anywhere close to it.
Yeah, because Double Dash brought so much to the table. If we're talking specifically its unique mechanics, there's the main selling point, of course, having 2 people in 1 car. There's the double items, character-specific items as well. So that, in a way, that was sort of a spiritual successor to those AI items in Super Mario Kart.
Exactly.
You had the return of the Yoshi egg and the return of the Fireball to an extent, although that was being used by Mario instead of Bowser.
Right.
But I always loved those. It just... yeah, it made picking a character, which already was a big enough decision in itself because of the different weight classes, it gave that choice even more weight.
I love that. And like, it was also nifty how you could just like take characters that weren't in the game before. Like you got your Petey Piranhas and your Birdos, and you just mix those up with other characters that would be your normal mainstays of previous games. It's like, I think... if I'm not mistaken, I believe that was the first game that had Toadette in it.
Yeah, it is.
I'll always appreciate Double Dash for being the first introduction of Petey Piranha, which we don't see him anywhere near enough.
No, if we're excluding Tour, he hasn't reappeared in Mario Kart since, although maybe A Deluxe will prove us wrong by the time this video has been uploaded.
Oh.
You know, we might see him added as a character.
I sure hope so. I feel like the opportunity's there with Piranha Plant Cove being a new stage.
Yeah, it's right there. It's a golden chance. Come on, Nintendo. Bring PC Piranha back. You can't have King Boo without PC. You can't break up the dream team like that.
One thing I find very interesting in Mario Kart Double Dash is, I guess Peach Beach gets as close as you can get to it, but it doesn't really have a distinct Isle Delfino stage correlating with Sunshine.
Yeah, it seems obvious, and it's strange that it never happened, because, like, Peach Beach, it is a beach-themed track, and it does have Cataquack, so it just makes you wonder, why didn't they make it Gelato Beach?
Yeah, that would have been a really cool level theme, because, like, now it's just like, well, we got Koopa Troopa Beach, we got Peach Beach, we just throw the name of a character on a beach.
Although you mentioning Sunshine has actually made me remember something about these tracks, and it's similar to Sunshine in that you can see some tracks from others. So for example, you can see Daisy Cruiser from Peach Beach in the distance, just like you can see other levels from Delfino Plaza in Mario Sunshine, and it just creates a sense of a world, really, and all the tracks having a place in the Mario universe.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if I've ever noticed that before, so I gotta go back and play Peach Beach soon to see that. 'Cause that's a bit of trivia I was not aware of. But I also like that game introduced having different carts for characters instead of just the usual pipe frame design.
Yeah, that's another thing I completely forgot Double Dash was the one to introduce.
I also found it interesting because, like, you'd have characters like Bowser and Bowser Jr. and Wario and Waluigi as pairs, but since they were in different weight classes, they could only use one of their two vehicles together.
Yeah, it had to be the heavier of the two.
Yeah, because you could not fit Bowser into any of the small cars. You can't put him in a baby stroller.
Pram, no. I wish. I think I'd say the first Mario Kart game where the track design started to feel like modern Mario Kart. I feel like you could slip a Double Dash track into Mario Kart Wii or Mario Kart 7 and it would go unnoticed because they really refined the tracks back then. You had so many bangers in there like DK Mountain, Dino Jungle, Wario Coliseum, Daisy Cruiser. I don't think there was a bad track in Double Dash, and that just says something about the quality of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, especially when you compare what they did for Wario's stage between the two games, like, that's night and day.
100%, yeah.
And it's like, not only is the theme more exciting and dynamic, which I guess you can really attribute to like it's working on much stronger, more powerful hardware.
Yeah.
It's like, you could not pull off a Wario Coliseum stage on a 64.
Absolutely not, no. What you could pull off, though, is Baby Park, but I think that is such an amazing track in Mario Kart Double Dash, purely because of the item mechanics where you got the big Bowser shells flying around, the massive bananas on the track. It just makes for such a chaotic experience, especially when it's 7 laps long, man.
I didn't really think about that, but that was the first instance in the series since Super Mario Kart where a track isn't just 3 laps.
Yeah, you had 2 instances of that actually, with Baby Park being 7 and then Wario Coliseum being 2.
Oh, that's right. And that's what they really should have done in Mario Kart 64 for like Rainbow Road, is just have it 2.
Yeah, that would have made so much more sense, because, I don't know, you'd be racing on Rainbow Road for like 5 minutes and still be going.
And like if you're far enough ahead of people in that, it's like you're just driving, just casually cruising around, nothing's going on.
Yep.
But one thing I really liked in Double Dash, because I know I played a lot of multiplayer in that game at the time for races, where you would have player 1 and player 2 both in the same cart.
Oh yeah, I loved that.
And I love the extra bit that where like if you're the person in the back, you can also just throw a punch and steal items from people.
Yeah, that was amazing. Yeah, if you're near enough to someone, you can... I remember with Waluigi, he just kicks them, which is great.
Yeah, it's interesting that they haven't brought something like Double Dash back since, because I know Nintendo always likes having a multiplayer mode where like any skill level can join in and have like an easier experience out of it, because like obviously you got the one who's driving, they've got the more skill-based gameplay involved. Like even like with Galaxy 2 where it's like, oh, one person plays as the Luma, and like that's not a very involved role, but like, well, you can give that to like a
younger sibling.
Yeah, and they'll have a fine time and be able to do things, and they don't have the same stakes that you have there.
Yeah.
Double Dash sort of delivers something similar with that would be nice for them to bring back in some form in future entries, because they haven't yet.
Right, and it's honestly a great implementation, because not only is it good for having one more involved role, but also you have the ability to freely swap the characters if you both press Z at the same time. So even if you got 2 people on the same skill level, 2 very skilled Mario Kart players, you can cooperate, which is something we haven't seen in future entries.
Yeah, and which, to double back to what I was saying earlier, is like that feature, even if you are just the person throwing at the back, is like the skill level can go as far as you want it, because like if you go on a hard difficulty and race like that, you gotta be in sync. Have you ever experienced one of those LAN parties with Mario Kart Double Dash?
Oh, I wish I could say that I had, but unfortunately not. Have you?
No, same deal here. I just thought I'd ask just in case. It's like, it needs so much extra prep work to make it happen. It's surprising they even put that together as an option to do. Another thing that's kind of interesting to think about with Double Dash is that with a lot of the installments to follow, there was always a hardware-centric change that influenced how the game was presented or even played. But in the case of Double Dash, it was going from just 3D to better 3D. So they needed some sort of gameplay gimmick that would make it stand out more.
Yeah.
Like if they just did Mario Kart 64 too, in terms of sales, they probably would have been fine.
Yeah, they would have been cruising it. Maybe it wouldn't quite have reached the heights of Mario Kart Double Dash, but they would not have to worry about it flopping at all, I'd say.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Mario Kart Double Dash, it set the trajectory into motion for what the future entries would follow, but there are still, of course, some gaps there that were filled in by later entries, like the lack of retro tracks, and the still admittedly slippery feeling controls. Some of which was fixed in the very next entry, being Mario Kart DS, which again, while it is less of an evolution from Mario Kart Double Dash than maybe Double Dash was from 64, it feels like a lot more of a refined experience overall. The controls feel a lot more akin to what you'd expect from even a modern Mario Kart game, and it had the mainstays like the retro tracks. So yeah, in many ways, Mario Kart DS was potentially the first quote-unquote modern Mario Kart.
I'd be inclined to agree with that, because for the exact same points that you mentioned, they also, something very noteworthy is that it was the reintroduction of the jump.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because that was one of the things that whenever I go back to Double Dash, I always notice, like, oh man, not having that jump is like, in some of the older games prior to the Wii, it didn't really add a lot, but its absence is noticeable still.
Yeah.
But I also feel like Mario Kart DS, in terms of those first 5 entries, has some of the strongest course designs out of them. It's like when I think of things like Airship Fortress,
Yep.
That's, I think, the very first course that calls back to Super Mario Bros. 3.
It is, yeah.
Because, like, at that point, it's like they never brought that game back in any really distinctive ways up until that game. So, like, that felt especially fresh and nostalgic at the same time.
It was such a cool course as well from a design point of view, because every step of the way you'd be dodging a different hazard. You've got the bullet bills at the beginning, then the rocky wrenches as you're turning around the corner, the bars of fire, then you shoot out of the cannon, spiral down the fortress, and then, yeah, it's just something different being thrown at you all the way through.
And it's also notable to mention that it's the first introduction of a Delfino square. Or a Delfino stage being the square.
Yeah, ironically enough, in Mario Kart DS rather than the one that actually was on the GameCube.
Oh, which also goes to say, like, granted, they did have a battle arena based on Luigi's Mansion in Double Dash, but Mario Kart DS is the one that also brought Luigi's Mansion as a stage.
And then also, on that same line of thought, you've got Tick-Tock Clock, which was a Mario 64 stage, turned into a track in Mario Kart DS.
That's true. They really fixed the problems the other games had. Yeah, it was also interesting to be the introduction of online multiplayer for a Mario Kart game, which I can say I didn't dabble in too often.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah, the DS era just in general was one where online play wasn't something I used too often, but the fact that it was an option was very nifty.
And then, of course, for other multiplayer options, you had DS download play as well, which was amazing at the time because only one person needed to have the game for you to be able to play with a friend.
Yeah, which they also did have that feature in Super Circuit, but the difference here is, like, you don't need anything but your DS to participate. It's like Super Circuit, you still needed to get a hold of a link cable. Otherwise, you'd be out of luck. It's also Mario Kart DS, Super Circuit notwithstanding, was the first game where going back to previous entries, they felt smaller, and it was all because of those retro courses being so prominently on the screen, where you look at your courses like, this is double what I'm used to always seeing.
Yep, 32 tracks, this is insane. So much content right here. Although I will say, the retro track selection wasn't amazing. The fact that there was double the content was great. Don't get me wrong, but there were a few weaker tracks in there and some compromises were made to the Double Dash tracks. I feel like there were some strong ones in there, like Sky Garden from Super Circuit. All the N64 tracks made a pretty graceful transition, but it's really just those Double Dash tracks when you think about Luigi Raceway, Mushroom Bridge, Yoshi Circuit, and what was it? Baby Park, yeah. All of them got a rough deal when it came to Mario Kart DS, because many of the things that made those tracks so charming were lost there, like the ability to go up the rails on Mushroom Bridge, or most of the shortcuts on Yoshi Circuit. The chaos of Baby Park being toned down very significantly, because the lack of custom items and the reduction down to 5 laps and the increase in width of the course. Yeah, it was tragic for the GameCube fans out there, I suppose.
Yeah, which I guess, like, it's not even Mario Kart DS's fault. It's like, well, its predecessors, there were only 4 to work with. Because, like, with Super Mario Kart, the tracks are the weakest the series had, which naturally to be expected with it being the first one on the most limited of the hardware.
Yeah.
So it doesn't bring too much exciting flair to the course lineup, and they have a lot of them to compensate for the fact that they're only pulling from 4 games. It was like in future entries, they downsize how many Super Mario Kart tracks they usually introduce.
Yeah.
DS didn't have that luxury.
They had to be formulaic, because I think in DS there were 4 from each prior entry. Like within each Retro Cup, the first track was SNES, then it was 64, then GBA, then GameCube. So it was a complete even split there. So naturally, yeah, you had a few SNES tracks weighing the selection down. I think another thing that would be remiss not to mention here that DS brought to the table was its mission mode.
Oh, yes, that's true.
You can't talk about DS without mentioning this, because, again, it hasn't been seen since this game, yet it was such a cool idea.
It's nifty to have boss battles in a Mario Kart game.
Yeah, and a lot more single-player content as well.
I'm pulling a bit of a blank here when it comes to the characters from that game, the newly introduced ones. Aside from Rob and Drybones, who else did they add that wasn't in a prior Mario Kart?
I think that was it, because the other unlockable characters were Waluigi and Daisy, who were already added in Double Dash.
That makes sense.
But Rob was such an out-of-left-field pick. It was,
yeah.
I mean, when I played through the first time, I had no idea who he even was.
Yeah, and it's like, this also predates his appearance in Smash Bros. So
It
that's
does,
like,
yeah.
oh, it's his first big cameo playable appearance.
Maybe that was the reason he managed to sneak into Brawl.
Yeah. It's like, well, now he's a popular Mario Karter.
Yep. And then with the characters, each one had 3 of their own unique cars. Well, I say 3, it's one of them was a standard car for all of them, but then they had 2 unique ones for each of them. And some of these were really cool. Like Luigi had a Poltergust theme car, which was amazing. DK had like a Ramby one. Bowser had the aeroplane looking one. I've forgotten what the vehicle is actually called.
Oh, the Hurricane.
The Hurricane, yeah. So some of those were awesome. And then once you got far enough in the game, you were able to just use any character with any car, just chop and change. And that was so cool.
Yeah, I remember when I was playing through that game the first time, I wasn't actually expecting that to be an option. I was like, oh, you got your characters with their certain carts, and they fit in them all snugly. It's like, just works. Because it was interesting when you look at the body proportions of characters in that game. I'm thinking like Bowser and Wario, where it's like their bodies really thin out at the bottom so they fit into the darkness of the cart.
Yeah. I always used to find it funny how you could squeeze Bowser into the tiny little toad mushroom car.
Because they didn't have the same problem with Double Dash, where it's like, oh, you're too big, you just can't use that cart. Because like those ones, they had to have the full-bodied models for how that operated.
Yeah.
But like DS, that wasn't a thing they had to worry about. Which also something worth noting is the fact that Mario Kart DS introduced what are really the standard carts for Mario Kart. And I feel like it comes down to hardware limitations for why they didn't try to model out a pipe frame cart as the default standards. It's like going forward, I think they usually have both options, the standard carts and pipe frames. But yeah, DS just like, oh no, just standards.
Yeah.
And we can't forget the most valuable feature of all, which was making your own little logo.
Oh yeah, the emblem creator. It was surprisingly in-depth as well. You had lots of tools to work with, lots of colors and brush sizes. It was great.
It was one of those things that makes you like, if you don't have the artistic skill built up yet and you start working on that and you're like, I can only make trash, but it's my trash.
Yeah, exactly. Also, can we just address the fact that Waluigi just has an excavator for no apparent reason? Like, why does he drive an excavator?
Oh, it's the same reason that Wario drives a tractor. They just had to get side gigs.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, actually. I didn't draw that parallel between them.
Yeah, they had some goofy vehicles for those guys. But like, I do actually, that's the thing I really like about Waluigi's in particular, was like, that's such a dynamic, interesting shape for a cart. Was like, it really stands out. Because like, you don't really have cart designs where like it's a big thing coming out the top. No. Which I guess in more modern games, you couldn't really have that because you need room for your gliders.
That's true, yeah. I didn't think about the logistics of that. That probably explains why it hasn't been brought back.
But they really took it to the next level when they got to Mario Kart Wii, bringing in all those bikes.
Oh, yeah.
Man, I remember being so pumped when that game was coming out, and you get to use the Wario bike.
Yeah, it was cool that they brought that one in specifically for Wario. That was a neat little reference there.
Yeah, I guess it's because most of the Mario Kart cast doesn't have canonical vehicles of their own, but I love that they incorporate Wario's stuff into the games. And I remember we've spoken about this before, not on the podcast, but what was the names for the 2 different types of bikes in terms of drifting?
I don't know if there were official names, but there's inside drifting and outside drifting.
Right.
Now, the ones that hug the corners better are the inside drifting ones, and I think they're the ones that are competitively favoured, because that's another thing. Mario Kart Wii has a very active competitive scene to this day.
Wait, I find that the funniest thing. I'm glad that's a thing that's happening, but like, I wouldn't have guessed Mario Kart Wii of all games.
Yeah, when you think of Mario Kart Wii from a casual perspective, you associate it with the insanity and how hectic the items were. Just how frantic that game was.
Speaking of the items, because that was the only game so far to date that had the thundercloud.
For good reason.
Yeah, and it's the only item that introduces like an RNG element that's negative to the person who gets it.
Yeah, which is probably why they removed it in future entries.
Yeah, which just adds to that level of like, this is the competitive one?
Yeah, when you think about it, like Mario Kart Wii just had such a skewed item system in favor of chaos.
Yeah.
Because you had not only the star and bullet bill, but that game also had the Mega Mushroom, which was just like another invincibility item. I'm pretty sure the frequency of blue shells was multiplied by 10 since Mario Kart DS, because you get screwed over by them so many times in Wii.
Oh, and the unfortunate thing there is like, you don't even have a super horn to defend you.
Nope. And then as well, further adding to the chaos is that this was the first game where they went from 8 to 12 races per race.
Yes, and going back to Rainbow Road and Wario Stadium and Mario Kart 64 is like, even just having more racers, granted the system limitations at the time wouldn't have really helped with that, but like that would have at least given those stages a bit more to go with. Because like if you add 4 extra people to the race, like at least there's a chance you'll encounter more people.
Yeah, it would make it feel a lot less barren for sure on a track like Wario Stadium.
And that's the thing too, is like with Mario Kart Wii coming out, that made it for all the previous games, same effect that Mario Kart DS had when it came to stages feeling more barren in previous games. Races themselves feel more barren in previous games to Mario Kart Wii because it has so many extra racers. And granted, I guess the stages, for the most part, are scaled appropriately for that change, so it's not like it doesn't necessarily feel super empty, but when you compare the two, there's a lot more going on in Mario Kart Wii compared to its predecessors.
Yeah, definitely. And I think some of that goes down to the track design as well, because they really stepped it up even further with this one.
Yeah.
And created some really unique tracks and added a lot of interesting mechanics as well. Like the whole trick system, that was never there in previous entries, and it's one of the things that makes going back to the older games feel very strange, because you go up ramps and you expect to press the shoulder button and do a little trick, but no, that was introduced in Wii.
And that's what I was saying earlier with like the jump mechanic, where it's like it doesn't really feel like it's doing much in the previous games, because tricks is what really makes the jumps matter now. And one thing that I've always appreciated a lot with Mario Kart Wii, and I know I was in the minority in my friend groups playing this game growing up, but I loved the motion controls.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like I would, like having the Wii wheel, I remember always thinking like, where does Mario Kart go from here? This is terrific.
That was definitely my primary way of controlling the game when it came out. I don't know, I never liked the way the nunchuck felt that much in Mario Kart Wii, but the motion controls, oddly enough, felt natural.
And it's funny because I never actually tried any other control scheme for that game. I just gave the base one a shot and I was like, I love this, so I'm just sticking with that. But I feel like Mario Kart Wii was the game that changed up my playstyle the most for its time, because I know Mario Kart DS is where drifting really took over for me, where I'd be like drifting at every single opportunity. And then with Mario Kart Wii, I would always play as bikes, and then the Wario bike, of course. And what changed up my style was like I'd be always trying to go in a firm straight line at every opportunity, because you could do the wheelies to speed up.
Yes.
Yeah. And even now, like bikes have become a mainstay, but I don't think, because I've mostly been using karts in the future games, but like I don't think wheelies are around anymore. Like, that was a Wii thing.
I think the reason that's happened is because the wheelies just made the bikes too overpowered, so there was no real reason to use the cars, because bikes just dominated. They were so fast, and because you could just wheelie on any straightaway, it just goes so far ahead of the pack.
Yeah. Also, Mario Kart Wii was the first, and I wonder if the only Mario Kart game where your data unlocked you a character.
Oh yeah, you're referring to Rosalina here?
Yeah.
I think you might be right, yeah.
Which I guess they picked a good game for it, because like if you own a Wii and you don't own Super Mario Galaxy, you gotta pick that up.
Yeah. I suppose while we're on the subject, we have to mention the roster of Mario Kart Wii, because that was massive.
Yeah.
A lot of characters were in there, and you had really cool picks like Dry Bowser in there.
Oh, yeah.
There were a lot of babies, granted, which started a trend that people don't really like these days.
Right.
Alongside Baby Mario and Luigi, you had Baby Daisy and Baby Peach too. But I think there were some really cool additions to the roster that make up for those, like Funky Kong as well.
Yeah, Funky felt like such a left field pick to me when it came to Kongs, because they usually kept it pretty strict, like, well, it's just DK, and then they bring in Diddy for Double Dash. But the fact that, like, oh, we're also going to pull Funky Kong in here, it's like, holy, that seems like a character they just wouldn't touch. But, like, now that he's there, you couldn't see it any other way. Granted, I think he was the hardest character to unlock in that game, or at least from my experience with it.
I think it was either him or Dry Bowser. Both of them were pretty tough to unlock from what I recall.
Yeah, because I feel like, I'm really rusty on this, but I feel like it was a time attack challenge that may have involved, was Banshee Boardwalk in that game? It was some sort of boost stage at the very least.
I think it was SNES Ghost Valley.
You know what? That would make sense, because I feel like I remember hitting the edges of the track, and like them being those perfectly squared blocks.
Yeah, it was always just so satisfying to see those question marks get filled in and see that roster gradually build up, and that's a feeling we're sort of missing in modern Mario Kart games and just modern games in general. It feels like unlockable characters are almost a thing of the past these days.
Yeah, because the focus now is mostly on like the carts and the customizable parts.
In a way, it's good because you can pick your favorite from the beginning, but I'll always miss the satisfaction that comes with unlocking each new character.
Yeah, because it's like cool to get a nice pair of wheels, but like you compare that to Waluigi, like that's great. You don't get those same thrills out of any random piece of a cart. But when we speak of new characters, man, Mario Kart 7 really struck gold.
Were you a fan of the new additions in that game, or were you...
Oh no, that was a deception.
Okay, I was gonna say, I was worried there for a second.
I do think it's interesting for them to try experimenting and putting something in like the Honeybee Queen. But at the same time, it's like, if you take Waluigi off the roster and you put in a Honeybee...
There is something very wrong there.
Yeah, and it did sort of establish the whole having a character costume as its own slot, which I guess in a sense Mario Kart Wii technically did with Dry Bowser, but like Dry Bowser just feels a lot more distinct than Metal Mario to me.
Yeah, for sure.
There's like it's a whole different model. It's like you didn't just change Bowser's palette.
Whereas Metal Mario is just Mario with a metallic skin applied to him. It's just a power-up, it's not a different character.
And it seems like an interesting time for them to have introduced Metal Mario as a character, because you would think, well, that'd have to have been in Mario Kart 64 at the height of that character's popularity.
Or even Mario Kart DS when Super Mario 64 DS just came out, but no.
Yeah, that actually would have been the optimal time, because in Mario Kart 64, it's like they probably put in all that they could.
Yeah, considering that they had to cut one character before the final game, it's not surprising that they didn't chuck him in there.
But then, yeah, Mario Kart 7, what it lacks in characters, it at least makes up for in the changes that they made to the formula, because having the gliders and underwater sections adds so much more variety to the levels.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, before when you were airborne, it was just a case of, okay, let's wait until I hit the ground again, but in Mario Kart 7, when you've got the gliders, you can actually have some degree of control over the way you move in the air, and that adds a whole new dimension to how you play the tracks.
Yeah, I always appreciated with the addition of actually having 3D in Mario Kart 64 is that stages started to have verticality to them. But like Mario Kart 7 made that verticality matter so much more, to a degree even higher than Mario Kart Wii with adding tricks to it. Because like there's a lot of parts where like, oh, you got your ramp jumps and so many stages.
Every single stage, yeah.
And then I also always found it interesting how they had not one, but two Woohoo Island stages in Mario Kart 7.
Oh yeah, you had Woohoo Loop and Maka Woohoo, didn't you?
Yeah, and it like, from like a practical perspective for Nintendo, it's like, that makes perfect sense because you just remade this island that you had in multiple games on the 3DS for Pilot Wings Resort.
Yep.
Yeah, so I was like, oh, that seems like it wouldn't have been too hard to try to, rather than building from scratch, you've got the blueprints.
And both of those were amazing tracks, though.
Oh, yeah. Because that, I think, if memory serves, that's the introduction of having a course that you never do two of the same laps.
Section tracks, yeah, the ones that are broken down into 3 different segments, rather than being 3 laps. You had Maka Woohoo, the Rainbow Road as well, and I think that's such a cool idea because it makes tracks feel more like an adventure than a loop.
Yeah. It also makes it much harder, I always found, to like on the higher difficulties, to clear a track in first place. Because you don't have that same luxury of like, okay, this is my 3rd time on this lap. I've got it really committed to muscle memory in the short term, so I could really optimize my path. And that one, it's like, well, this is your first time in this section on this round of your cup. You screw it up, you don't get another chance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that was a really cool trend, and I'm glad that carried forwards into Mario Kart 8. But just in general, I feel like Mario Kart 7 had a very strong lineup of tracks, and particularly retro tracks, I have to say. There were a lot of fan favourites from previous entries in this one. You had Koopa Cape, Maple Treeway, Waluigi Pinball, even though Waluigi himself wasn't in the game. You had Airship Fortress, Mushroom Gorge. There were so many incredible tracks, and yeah, it feels like they used them all up on Mario Kart 7, but of course, we're getting a lot of these added once again back to Mario Kart 8 with the Booster Course Pass.
Very true. I'm trying to think, because whenever I'm trying to think of examples, I think of Mario Kart 8 rather than 7, but I feel like 7 was the start of them remixing some of those classic stages when they brought them back to incorporate the gliders in the water.
Yeah, I think it was done to a much lesser extent in 7, but it still was done. I think with Daisy Cruiser, for example, they added an underwater section where you'd normally have the engine room, I think.
Right.
And then Koopa Cape, they turned the underwater, well, the tube into an underwater tunnel instead.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yeah, so like little things like that, just they take the new mechanics of the game and just enhance what those old stages used to be. I also find it interesting, like that's the second time in the series where they had not the core Mario team exclusively working on it, because they also had Retro Studios of all companies being involved in that one.
Right. Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, which really stands out when you see the Donkey Kong stage in that game being directly from a retro title.
Yep, it is Donkey Kong Country Returns in a track. So I think when you take all of this into consideration, Mario Kart 7, it was a very well-made package, but it's one that it's a bit forgotten today, and it's a bit overshadowed because what came next was Mario Kart 8, which in a lot of ways was just Mario Kart 7, but I hate to say it, Mario Kart 7 but better.
Yeah, I feel like that's the Mario Kart transition where it seems like it's like, well, they took what they had and just polished it to a perfect sheen. Granted, it did have its own gameplay gimmick that it introduced with the gravity.
Yeah.
But it still just very much feels like an expansion of Mario Kart 7.
For sure, yeah. Because the anti-gravity, while it was the main selling point, I suppose, it isn't a huge game-changing thing compared to what gliders and underwater segments were, what two people in one car was. Yeah, it's a much more subdued main mechanic.
Although I would say that in terms of like visual variety, it does add a lot in that department. Because when you have the courses being able to like going up the side of a waterfall in Shy Guy Falls.
Yes.
Or like having things like twist around and you go upside down in places, like the spectacle of it is unparalleled compared to previous entries.
Oh, 100%, because it allowed for things like loop-de-loops and driving upside down. While it doesn't feel different when you're racing it, it looks incredible.
Which I can also say is like the very first loop-de-loop the series ever saw was Mario Kart DS for its Rainbow Road.
Yep.
Like, no comparison with what it looks like today. I also find it kind of interesting that Mario Kart 8 was the first entry in the series to introduce DLC, because I would have anticipated that to be Mario Kart 7's additional thing.
Yeah, because they did introduce DLC in a few 3DS games, like even Smash Bros, although that was both on the Wii U and the 3DS, you had DLC there. So yeah, maybe they could have added characters or tracks to 7, but I suppose, yeah, they were just saving it for the main console one, which they thought would sell better, and yeah, it did.
And especially when you consider it today, where it's like, well, we've got the double dip on that game.
Yeah, and despite being a re-release on the Switch, it's still the best-selling Nintendo Switch game.
Yeah, they really took a gamble on releasing that game a second time over, and holy did it ever pay off.
There's a reason it's so successful, though, because as a Mario Kart game, I feel like it's the most refined experience to date, and it's just so fun to play. If we're talking game feel, it just feels so fun to control, so fluid.
Oh, yeah. It's funny, I was like, yeah, the game's kind of perfect. Where do we go from here?
Like, it's just so polished.
I remember always thinking back when I was playing Mario Kart 8 on the Wii U, trying to think, like, what could they possibly do after this game to have that gradual, like, it always gets better, but, like, this one feels the most, like, peak Mario Kart. And then the answer was, we bring it back.
Yep. And it's still going to this day. They still have not made a Mario Kart 9.
And, like, I think it is also a testament to the quality of that game where it's like, I'm not even disappointed we don't have a 9 yet. Because, like, Mario Kart 8, it scratches the itch every time.
Yeah, it really is the gift that keeps on giving.
It's like, by the end of that one, it's going to have, like, I'm not even sure what the total courses is going to be at the end. But
so
yeah,
nearly
that's
100.
Madness. Like, frig.
When you think back when we started with 16 tracks in one game, it's come a long way.
Yeah, definitely. I do know, I personally don't have as much animosity towards the base roster of Mario Kart 8 as I know most people do. Because, like, that one got another surge of babies.
And Koopalings, too.
Koopalings, that was I know some people weren't too pleased about Koopalings coming to the cast, but for the first couple of years of Mario Kart 8, I was an Iggy main, so I was happy about it. Because like at that point, the novelty of the Koopalings was still pretty fresh. So I was like, oh man, getting to play as them in a Mario Kart game? Delightful.
Yeah, no, I personally don't have any qualms with the Koopalings, but there are some questionable picks in there, I do have to say, like, Pink Gold Peach is a bit of a weird one.
That opened up the floodgates to just complete chaos. I blame it on Metal Mario.
Yeah, it was his fault. And then you've got Baby Rosalina, who canonically should not exist. Baby Rosalina does not look like that. Yeah, overall, the roster was pretty solid, and even now it's being added to in the Booster Course Pass with Birdo, and hopefully Diddy Kong soon, because he should be in the game. Why is he not there already?
Holy, I didn't even consider that, and I could easily see them putting Diddy Kong in over Petey.
Hopefully they both make it.
Oh, yeah. Fingers crossed. But I mean, granted, Mario Kart DS was what really introduced characters outside the Mario Kart realm joining the fray, but Mario Kart 8 really ran with it.
Oh yeah, Link, Villager, Inkling, well, it's not quite Nintendo Kart yet, but there's quite a few guests in there, and they have their own tracks as well. So you've got Hyrule Circuit, the Animal Crossing Village, and I think, I've forgotten which specific Splatoon map it is, but there's one battle mode course. I think it might be Black Belly Skate Park, maybe?
Oh, I was gonna say Urchin Underway.
Oh yeah, you might be right, actually.
People in the comments can call us out on that if they want.
I'm sure they will. Yeah, I feel like those tracks did quite a good job of representing the source material very well, especially the Animal Crossing one, with the 4 different seasons, the coins being bells, and all the villagers and Animal Crossing characters dotted around on the sidelines, cheering you on.
Yeah.
It captured the essence of Animal Crossing.
Oh, absolutely. I always really enjoyed how they had an Excite Bike track in that game.
Oh yeah.
Like, that was a nifty addition, and if I recall correctly, that one changes up its layout, and it's not always exactly the same.
I think the positioning of the ramps can be random between different play sessions.
Yeah, which is like, you'll never truly get accustomed to the course. But yeah, it's so funny to look at that game, how it was at launch, compared to what it looks like today, in terms of like how much is on the cup selection.
Yeah, because back on the Wii U in the base game, the very base game, it was just your standard 32 tracks. 4 cups of normal and then 4 retros. And now we've got, I don't even know how many. It's 24 cups of 4? Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, madness.
But the quality of the tracks has never ceases to amaze me, especially like the base game ones and the DLC that was added on top of that. Like each Mario Kart 8 track from a design point of view is amazing, and even the retro tracks, they took these older tracks and completely modernized them and put them on exactly the same level to the point where they can stand toe-to-toe with the modern ones by introducing all the anti-gravity, and I think nothing exemplifies that more than the remakes of the GBA tracks. Cheeseland and Ribbon Road.
Oh, agreed. Those ones, like, you put them side by side with the original, it's like, it doesn't even it seems like a whole new track.
And yet, when you look at the maps, you can't deny that's Cheeseland and that's Ribbon Road. It's so cool.
One thing I always found interesting with how Mario Kart is, like when you think mainline Mario games, and you think another company or another studio within Nintendo makes a sequel to it, they don't really call back to much from those games. Like, you never see anything about Sarasa Land in the mainline Mario games.
No.
But with Mario Kart, despite the fact that Super Circuit was made by a different team, Super Circuit's treated exactly the same as all the other entries in the series, and always has representation.
It's arguably been treated even better in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe than the rest. Even to an extent, the DLC with Snowland and what looks to be Riverside Park as well. I wish the same could be said for Sky Garden, but unfortunately I'm not the biggest fan of that one and the treatment it got.
Yeah, fair. But speaking of that Riverside Park, I've played that course a fair number of times on Mario Kart Tour.
Ah, yeah.
You can make the case, and I'm sure most people wouldn't, that it's the true Mario Kart 9.
Yeah, some people would beg to differ there, but you could make that claim.
But I can say, as a daily player for years, it is such a good time. So what it basically ends up, how the flow of it is like every 2 weeks, it has a pool of cups. And these 2-week intervals are called like tours. So your Mario Kart tours.
Oh, yeah.
For example, this current period of time, we got a Charging Chuck Cup at the beginning here that has Coconut Mall, RMX, Choco Island, 2RT, Shroom Ridge.
What was that last one, sorry?
Yeah, so that's I guess the RMX stands for remix, so it's not directly based on a specific Choco Island from Mario Kart Tour, if I have the understanding right. That's what the RMX means on the titles. Ours means you play the course in the opposite way, and the T is it's trick focused, because the whole thing about Mario Kart Tour is, well, I mean, at the end of the day, you're still racing and you want to get first place, but it's less about a focus on that and more focused on the score-based element of building up multipliers and trying to get the highest score you can in a stage. So a stage that has T in the name at the end, those ones, they've designed the stage to have more jumps and little things to keep your multiplier going. Like when you think classic Donkey Kong on the NES, where you got those like red girders.
Oh yeah.
So they have those all over the place in some of the remixed courses in Tour to change up the layout of the tracks. So like you think Baby Park in that game where it's like, okay, that normal oval shape. Well, they'll have those girder-based tracks that come off of there and take you into different turns and stuff to make it into a whole new level. And then you also still have your regular versions of the stages mixed in there too. Like I'm looking at a cup right now, the Me Cup, that has Toad Circuit. Like that's just plain old Toad Circuit, how you know it and how you love it.
Yep.
But then most of the other ones you look at and they've got like the different letters in them. Like you got DK Mountain RT, which reverse with tricks. So you're getting a wild time out of that one.
How does that even work? Because the course starts off with you shooting out of a cannon, so do you just glide down?
Oh, they just take the cannon out. They'll put bouncing mushrooms in their place.
Ah.
They'll mix things up in ways that like you wouldn't normally see in any Mario Kart game prior.
Yeah.
And one other thing to mention, like each of these cups only has 3 stages that go into your big score for that cup, because the 4th one is always a mission. Not quite like mission mode in the 3DS game, because it's always like you're still kind of racing on a track, but you'll have stuff like Goomba Takedown, where you race along the track and you got to take out a certain amount of Goombas to get your 3 stars out of the mission.
Okay.
I know it's also super good for encouraging you to switch up your characters all the time, because normally in a Mario Kart game, you pick your favorite and you stick to it.
Oh yeah. I'm very loyal to my mains.
In this game, you can do that if you really want to. Any character works on any stage, but when you select a level, they're all classified based on 3 tiers. So like for the level, we'll do a quick example here. I go to Coconut Mall, and I can choose Dr. Mario, and he's a 3 item user here. So like he's the best pick for this stage. So you get 3 items whenever you hit an item box, which you would think for a game where you're building up combos and your items hitting people increases that combo. That's what you want. You want that many items.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it always encourages you to like pick your best players out of those for every given stage. One thing I'll mention for anyone who's never played the game and thinks about wanting to dabble, I have never spent real money on this game. And like I said, I play this pretty much daily. So like you can get a lot of mileage out of this game and not spend a dime.
There you go.
There's your Nintendo endorsed sponsorship deal for the day. Oh, and I don't think there's a better spot to end off on than Mario Kart Live Home Circuit.
Yeah, my favorite Mario Kart game that I have most definitely played.
I feel like the folks at home, if you've played this game, expand our conversation, add your experience down in the comments.
Please do.
Don't forget to leave your feedback, leave your likes, leave a subscribe, do all of those fun things.
That would be very appreciated. But with that, yeah, I think we've reached a natural conclusion. So thank you guys so much for listening to this installment of the Loading Zone podcast. Thank you to Schmidt Times here for taking the time out of your day to star on this episode.
Oh, no problem, pal. Thanks for having me.
And of course, being a content creator yourself, you have your very own channel. So would you mind telling the viewers about what it is you do on there?
Oh, you betcha. So I have a channel called Schmidt Times that you can check out. That's SchmidtTimes. I do Nintendo-centric videos. Video games are the core of the channel. It's a place where you can spend your minutes right with video games, past and present. Let me tell you, it's always a hoot and a holler. It's usually short-form content, very digestible, so give it a gander if you're interested. And of particular note, we have a Mario Kart trivia challenge that you may be interested in, and you can use this podcast for reference to solve some of the puzzles.
You may find some answers in this podcast. But yeah, I definitely can't advise you guys enough. If you've got a minute to check out Schmidt's channel, the link will be in the title, in the description, it will be everywhere, and I cannot recommend his content enough.
Oh, much appreciated.
Alrighty guys, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you guys in the next one.
Bye.